And the one thing that I hated to believe this before I started my PED journey is the role of genetics, right? People talk about like genetics, and I thought that was like, like your muscle bellies and like the things, the more like bodybuilding specific things. But no, it's the response to things, and like I will be completely transparent with everyone. Like I have a very favorable genetic response, and it was kind of like oh, because it's not me, it's not my crazy hard work ethic. Like I'm doing nothing differently than before I started, right? My nutrition is the same, my training is the same, or even actually dialed back. I've responded incredibly, like just blown up. And everyone's like, what are you doing differently? I'm like, nothing. I just put like in the very beginning a very, very small amount of testosterone that's now titrated, and I'm up 40 pounds.
Hey everybody, I'm here with Aaron Straker. Aaron is an online coach, a gym owner, the co-host of the Eat, Train, Prosper podcast, and a seriously jacked dude. So thanks so much for being with me here today, man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So I think the last year, I may have the timeline slightly off, but I think the last year you made the decision to go enhanced. And I'm really curious about how that's impacted your training, how that's impacted maybe your interactions with clients and your outlook. But I don't want to start there. I think that's kind of the middle of your story, right? So let's wind it back a little bit, talk about your training history. I know you've been training for like 20 plus years. I think again, I may have the timeline slightly off, but I believe you took 2023 was like your year to sort of make your best ever physique. You hired a coach, you buttoned up everything, you were in a caloric deficit for most of that year. So maybe walk me through what that year was like, maybe what precipitated that decision to kind of go all in during that period of time. What did you learn and what was it? What did you experience?
Yeah, so I kind of knew that like at the time the enhanced route wasn't really the plan. It was more like I'm going to go on. I think I'm ready to go on TRT. And I had known and I guess to back up a little bit, I'm just like a perpetually curious person. I like formulating my own opinions, and I even remember back as a child, and I think we're probably similar in age, at least close. Did did you guys have those DARE drug education classes?
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah.
Okay.
I remember. Do you remember being told not to lick toads? That's one of the biggest, yeah, the
I
biggest
don't
memories. I
remember that part, no.
have.
But I remember sitting there and I'm like, I don't know, 11, 12 years old. And they're just like, don't do drugs. No one do drugs. Drugs are bad. Like, don't do drugs. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, there's a lot of adults that are doing drugs. There's got to be some reason why they're doing them. And I feel like you guys just are not telling us. So I even as a child, I would just like, I don't know. I like to formulate my own opinions. And that's, just how I am. So I kind of knew that was coming. So I reached out to my who's one of my business partners, Jackson Pias. He's a wonderful coach, super knowledgeable. And I said, hey, I have this like kind of grandiose plan. I'm at the time I'm like 34 ish years old, and I'm like I want to dedicate an entire year to building like my best physique. We started on January 1st, 2023. I said I want like a commit to like at least like a 6 to 8 month build period until I'm like actually fat enough where like okay, like it's we don't need to get any fatter. I put on 25 pounds. I went from 190. No, I went from like a 190, almost 20. I went from like 195 to 215. And then I want to diet and get like super lean and build like my best physique ever. And then at the end of it, I'm going on TRT. So we worked backwards against that. Ended up being like a 6 month build and then like a 6 month deficit. And we put everything into it. We ended up like training together later on, and I mean we were training like insane because he was preparing for his bodybuilding prep. And it was really cool in that I had here in Bali like a lot of people come in, and a lot of different cool athletes, and it was really fun because I got to be the natural guy training with all the guys on enhanced. So I had a bit of like a chip on my shoulder that I wanted to like do all the volume and only reduce loads when I really needed to, which was very frequent, by the way. But I think it again, I formulated my own opinion that if you're not on gear, you can't handle the volumes, you can't recover, and those sorts of things. And what I had actually found out, which I was really surprised by, is many times I was actually recovering faster than them. And we can potentially get into, my hypothesis on why, later. But it was a really, really cool experience. I'm thrilled about the physique, that I built. I'm very, very proud of it. By the time we took those photos and stuff, I was like just shy of my 36th birthday. And like, I was really pumped about that after, literally 20 years of training and even a few good years. I really picked up nutrition well and hired my first coaches and really, really started to learn around like my very late 20s, like 29 into 30. So even of those like 5, 6 years, it was a significant improvement over like my previous efforts.
Wow. Had you ever had a period of time, like a big growth spurt where you made a lot of progress in a short time before that through your 20-year training history?
Only when I was young. I'm very fortunate that I played American football and we had coaches who, looking back on it, it's kind of funny, but they kind of like tried to steer us away from playing other sports so that we could like lift all year for football.
Yeah, yeah.
And boy, did it work with me. Like basketball was my first love until I started playing football. And I mean, for me, like the football, what really changed, like the football coaches treated us like we were men and the basketball coaches treated us like we were children. And I didn't like that. So it was a much more of like a mutual respect sort of thing. So yeah, I stopped playing basketball and they were just like, they knew enough for it to be productive. They would feed us. They would give like everyone after training had to have like your protein shakes and your peanut butter and jelly. So they knew enough to feed us. And then I was fortunate. I had a stepdad who had played football and he was in the know. So like they made sure I was eating and I put on a lot of weight through high school, like 20, 30 pounds per year. So by the time I was, entered my senior season when I was 17, I was already 215 pounds. And I've really oscillated between like 195 and 215 for like the next 20 years, really.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, those are the prime muscle building years. If you put in the work there, it'll stick for sure.
It was, I mean, I was probably like 22% body fat, something like that. So I wasn't super lean or anything like that. And I didn't know anything about like dieting for body composition or anything, but all I knew was like train really hard and make sure that you're like eating adequately, regularly. And boy, did it work.
Yeah. So I'm not questioning the decision to go on TRT, but just curious. Do you think that like you had this year, you made a ton of progress? What if you had decided to not go on TRT? Do you think you could have repeated that same level of effort again and made clearly not the same amount of progress, but do you think there was more blood from that stone you could have drawn?
No, I think the stresses was running too high. It would have required a significant drawback. I mean, it was weighing on other aspects of my life, like my relationship and stuff. And don't get me wrong, she's like super, super understanding. But we talked about it's like, hey, I'm doing this big project. I'm giving it everything. Like I would be literally at the gym for like 5.5 hours. And it wasn't we were training for 5.5 hours, but it would be like, 3 hour training. We would eat post workout and then we'd go do like sauna, hot bath, that sort of thing. And I would literally be gone for like 5.5 hours. So it was very, very consuming. And I did it for an entire year. And I just like when there isn't like another gear to all in when you're already all in. Do I think I could have continued to make progress? Like, yes, I do. And the conversation that like Brian and I have on Eat, Train, Prosper with this, your diminishing returns really start getting diminishing. And the hard question to ask yourself is like, is that six tenths of a pound, that I might be at 8% body fat. Like I was like 191 pounds, at 8% body fat is like 191.6 the next year
Right,
worth it for
right,
like the gargantuan effort.
right.
And, everyone has their different answers. Like I have a good friend here. His name is Brandon Kempter, an amazing natural bodybuilder. His answer is yeah, and it's been yeah for like 8 years or something like that. And he really, really does truly love it. But I think it's really comes down to the individual in that question.
Yeah, Ed Cohen, right, the world's greatest powerlifter. Maybe John Hack is better, but Ed Cohen has this quote where he's basically someone's like, "Hey, so why did you stop? Like you were the best." And he was enhanced, but basically he said, "I just didn't want to train that hard anymore, man." And like, yeah, like this was a guy whose life was all consumed with training, put absolutely everything into it, 900 pounds on his back, 900 pounds off the floor, like no matter what, even at all with all the tools at your disposal, that is a difficult task. It is your entire life. And even if you love it, yes, some guys, right, like the natural bodybuilder you mentioned, maybe they can do that indefinitely or close to indefinitely, but that's a tall ask for most people.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like I love training, but it did become like a job, and I would have like legitimate anxiety on the leg days because they were so heavy and so hard. And I mean, we would have like, these gnarly rest pause sets on the hack squat and stuff. I mean, you're incapacitated after. Like you finish your set and then you lay on the floor for like 6 minutes. And when you do that for a year straight, like it does start to weigh on, especially as food's getting lower, you're getting leaner, your recovery capacity is getting lower. And it's like there would be times on some of those leg days, like I'd have these insane hunger pains because it had just been like literally 5 hours since I ate last. And
Right.
I'm like starving and we still have these sets left. And like because I had this, it's going to be worth it when it all comes together to test your hypothesis. But like after I've tested it and it worked, it was a very tall order to be like, let's do it
Yeah,
again.
do it again. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but whatever, right? Scientists, you don't require scientists to keep running the same experiment indefinitely, right? Like that's too much. What would you say? I mean, it sounds like the training was high volume, high intensity. Was it also high frequency too? Is it like essentially as unsustainable as possible?
It was like a push pull legs rotation, and then we had an arm day on like the B rotation. The beauty though is we did have both every leg day was capped with a rest day on either side of it. So it would be like rest, legs, rest, and that was great. But we were doing cardio on the rest days. So like the days that I wasn't there, I was back at the gym at 8 a.m. for 30 minutes on the spin bike or on the stair climber or something like that. So it was there was a lot of activity, and again it was testing the hypothesis, right? It was high volume, it was high intensity, and the powers that be, right? The literature says that like you can't recover from that. I recovered perfectly fine. I was, like I said, 35 years old,
Hmm.
pretty past my prime, but by a definition of things. But I gave a lot. I gave everything else to it. Like my food was meticulous for an entire year. We had a very large recovery protocol with like sauna and that sort of thing. In the first like 3 weeks were pretty bad. I had brutal DOMs. And the beauty of it is we ran that entire program from end of May through the end of the year. So I was running the same program at the beginning of my build, or sorry, through the end of my build, all the way through my diet. The program didn't change at all. So it was we controlled variables, and I by the end of it, I was recovering better at the end than I was in the beginning, even though I was 25 pounds lighter because I was like right around like 192, 191 and had been dieting for 6 months. And the only thing that really started to suffer was my dumbbell pressing strength towards the end. So I was losing like 3 solid reps towards the end. And that's to be expected. If you've coached any number of people, like especially males, dumbbell pressing strength or even pressing strength in general does start to suffer by an appreciable degree when you get lean and you've been dieting for quite some time.
Yeah, leverages change, you lose that cushion. It's pretty much inevitable for
Yeah.
sure. And definitely, I think it's always smart to keep the same training program that helped you build the mass, right? I think that's a mistake where people want to change everything. There you can, I mean, I think there are some variables you can tweak to kind of satisfy your psychology. Sometimes I'll find with clients that maybe doing a slightly different variation of similar lifts can help, right? If they're really attached to something like a squat, doing like a pause squat, even doing something more extreme like a hack squat can help to get through that mental barrier. But at the same token, no, like if it built you mass, it's going to keep that mass when you're dieting if you do the same things.
And it's a really good ball like benchmark to be like, because if you're still able to perform same lifts, same reps, same loads, there is a higher probability that you are maintaining a higher degree of the muscle tissue that you built as if you just change things and lose your benchmarks, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm a
and I
big
think
fan
in
of
that phrase
keeping.
in particular, I like having benchmark lifts. Right, you need to have some kind of barometer that shows you're able to maintain that same basic level of performance for sure.
Mhm, exactly. Yep.
So you went into that year, you'd already decided in advance that you wanted to go on TRT, it sounds like, regardless of
Yeah.
the outcome. So
Yep.
what precipitated that? What made you think that was the next step for you?
I have a I have a lot of, and I'm sure you do as well. You get if you're coaching like a lot of American males, let's call it like late 20s and above, you're getting a lot of clients who are on TRT. And I feel perfectly fine stating this because it is the truth. A vast portion of the clinics out there providing these for them are dog shit, absolute dog shit. And what I found is like I had to learn a lot because like my clients were just completely unsupported from their clinics. Like some, I have clients like the clinics don't even follow up to get blood work, and it's been like 8 or 9 months. So I had to learn a lot. And it was kind of like a next step for me to be like, okay, I know a lot of things like in theory and on paper. I've read the research, but now I want to see like how I respond in regards to what is on paper, because we know things like that aren't always the case, right? And the example I like to use is you're a younger guy or girl and you want to get into like the coaching space for probably the same reasons that we did, but like let's say you've been that high school athlete who was never overweight and who's never had to diet, and a calorie deficit in theory, it on paper what it's like in textbook, but you have no direct experience going through a prolonged caloric deficit, how stress thresholds change, how you make decisions when you're hungry, how that might put strain on other aspects of your life. And then you're coaching from a standpoint of like, X is Y, do this, do better, but you have zero experience doing it yourself, right? And as someone who I have a pretty fair degree of my coaching roster is other clients, you can tell who's only done it in theory, and coaches it from a theory perspective, because they fall apart and they are honestly no better in their execution than an average Gen Pop person who's like an accountant or something completely unrelated to the fitness industry.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are some things you have to experience in order to be able to do. I mean, and that's true for everything, right? That's not just limited to fitness. I do think people can make the mistake in fitness. You assume that the guy who's the most jacked is the most knowledgeable, or maybe even the most lean, right? It's not necessarily the outcome that dictates that conforms the shape of your knowledge. But if you've not gone through the crucible, like, nah, there's just some things you can't teach.
Yeah, and the one thing that I hated to believe this before I started my PED journey is the role of genetics, right? People talk about like genetics, and I thought that was like like your muscle bellies and like the things, the more like bodybuilding specific things. But no, it's the response to things, and like I will be completely transparent with everyone. Like I have a very favorable genetic response, and it was kind of like because it's not me, it's not my crazy hard work ethic. Like I'm doing nothing differently than before I started, right? My nutrition is the same, my training is the same, or even actually dialed back because I can't handle as much because of like the CNS, the higher impact of like the CNS than compared to when I was natural because the loads are higher. I've responded incredibly, like just blown up. And everyone's like, "What are you doing differently?" I'm like, "Nothing." I just put like in the very beginning a very very small amount of testosterone that's now titrated, and I'm up 40 pounds.
I mean, I will say you did. So this is interesting. I don't know if this was your plan or Jackson's plan, but you actually did something that like the old Soviet style athletes used to do. So as part of their training, they would go through essentially intentionally induced overtraining without the use of testosterone. So they would grind people into the ground for 6, 12, 16, 20 weeks. And during that period of time, your body is literally fighting for its life, producing more androgen receptors, trying to get the most out of the endogenous production you've got. And so then the guys who survived that kind of brutal camp, they would reward them with PEDs and they would blow the fuck up. So
I mean
like
that.
you did kind of conduct a similar experiment. I'm not discrediting your genetics too, but
Mhm.
I think you actually created an environment that was more conducive to some of the growth you've had.
That I mean that's effectively what we did. Like I was really beat by the end of it. Food was, I was at the end of a diet, 6 month diet. Like food was low, but it never really had to go too low because literally we were training so much. My energy expenditure was like literally through the roof. So I was fortunate in that regard. And then one thing I did because I wanted to be a good, bro scientist. I got labs done like literally the day before I started the testosterone. It was the single highest total testosterone I'd ever had recorded in six
Yeah.
years. Not by like a massive margin. I was
Sure.
typically
Yeah.
like a 560 to like, 580 type of person, nanograms per deciliter. And this one came back at like a 615. So like nothing earth shattering, but still objectively the highest I've ever had by like 30 nanograms per deciliter, which I thought was
And
really
that was
interesting.
a sub 10% body fat too, right? That's you're
I
lean or
would say
not.
I was sub seven. I was
Yeah.
very lean, like leaner than I really cared to be, but I was like, we're here. Why does not push it? I'm not,
Good.
dead yet. I was like, I'm gonna push the leanness until I get a little miserable. And that's, what we did.
Well, so it sounds like the other thing you did is you were just healthy as shit, right? Like your body was about as efficient as it possibly could be at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
so
don't
you're
get me
going to
wrong.
metabolize the drugs better. You're going to respond to everything better.
Yeah, like everything was great except like irritability was high, sex drive was completely non-existent. But other than those things, like things were, I was efficient with work, because I knew, hey, at 11 I got to be at the gym. I won't be back till pushing 6. I need to wake up. I was up at 5:30 getting check-ins and stuff, getting programs done because I had to. So it when you push yourself into like a corner, you can get pretty efficient and productive with things because out of necessity.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, pressure shapes you, right? You only have a limited amount of time. You only have a limited amount of energy. If you're a person of ambition, you're going to make the most of it. Yeah, man. So you've made. So it sounds like. So how much? What would you? What was your? What has your progress been like this year then? In terms of maybe both in terms of like poundage and maybe like gym performance too.
Yeah, so I started at 191, and that was at the end of the diet. And by April 1st, so I started on January 16th. By April 1st, I was 218 pounds, and that was all just 150 milligrams per week of testosterone. And that was just like a number that I picked. It was like in America, you're typically going to get like 100 to 200, milligrams per week
Yeah, yeah.
prescribed. I have numerous clients from doctors prescribe 200 milligrams per week because that's something that people I'll hear on podcasts from like, well, 200 milligrams per week isn't TRT, and it probably is not replacement levels, no, but like I have multiple clients prescribe that from doctors, so I just picked the middle number and started, and I mean it was silly. I was literally putting on like four or 5 pounds per week, and it was like I have photos and stuff. I'm still very lean at 218. I'm probably 10%, maybe it's maybe still under. And yeah, I mean going from like a 7% body fat to 10% body fat, that's a significant increase in body fat percentage, but there's no reason to stay 7%, and you're trying to grow sort of thing. So that worked really, really well. And then it was at that time, it was on my birthday. My birthday's in March, and I was sitting around talking with like goals because what had happened was, which I wasn't prepared for, I had always kind of had this like pie in the sky physique, of like my ultimate dream. And it was like 212 to like 215 to be like lean, still have abs, those sorts of things. And I thought it was like, before I would tell myself like, maybe when I'm like 40, I can get there, but it's now like right about my 36th birthday, I'm there in like 6 weeks since starting teaching.
Yeah.
And I did feel unfulfilled in it because I felt like I was cheating to get there, because when you're a natural, I mean, and you have like a good, physique and I'm proud. I'm very, very proud of that natural physique that I built, but I grinded for years to get it. And now it's kind of like I snap my fingers. I do this one little thing differently. And it's like I just speed run like 5 to 7 years of progress in 5 to 7 weeks, and I felt a little like empty in that. And I also felt a little empty with goals because I hadn't really thought past this whole big long timeline, of like I'm going to do this year long thing and then I'm going to start TRT. But like that was the end of my my goal setting. I hadn't set more after that, and I felt really kind of empty. I had a lot of time back, and I found myself like getting less efficient with my work. And I was like, what do I do with training? I'll like pull things back, but I really like didn't have more goals to set. And I just, that was a period where I really found out about like an individual, like a character trait. If I don't have goals to pursue, I get really empty feeling. So I was like, I need some new goals or I'm going to be miserable. And then in talking with my fiance, Jenny, there was some recommendations from my coach, and he brought it up once. He said, I'm going to bring it up once and I'm never going to bring it up again. But I do think it would be worth your time to do like at least a year of competing. So we talked about it, and I kind of realized I have like 1 year to do this. We're going to move back to the States at the end of next year, at least part time. I need to start a family, these sorts of things. And I'm like, I have this 1 year to do it. And when I was younger, like when I got into lifting, I had all the muscle magazines and stuff like that. And I would always think about like, I'm going to do this one day. And the real prevailing thought was, I think if I don't do it, I'll regret it when I'm like in my 50s or something like that, looking back on my life. So that was what really helped me make the decision to then go from like that TRT to like actual PED usage into with the plans to do a year of competing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, man. That's super. A lot of that really, really resonates with me. Do you think so? It doesn't you do you in any way feel like you regret the decision? And maybe you're not a person. Maybe regret isn't even the right word. I don't know if you're a person who thinks of himself as having
Mhm.
regrets, but you did mention this notion that like you had it felt almost like cheating, and it sort of did make your goals. Your goals came so quickly that it's almost like they evaporated. Do you think was it worth losing that?
I would say so, yeah. Like I love having the knowledge, in that I would say it is worth it to me. I've been able to help clients a lot better, because now I've had enough where like I know what, because like you look at the list of like low estrogen symptoms, right, for a male using like TRT, and there's like 12. You may not experience all 12, but there's like a solid like four that are like I know for a fact, and now there's on the same side, the high estrogen symptoms. There's like a list of like 12, and like three of them I get like really noticeably for me. So I've been able to help, like I said, it's probably of my male roster, probably like 15-18% of them are on TRT, right? They come to me on TRT. I'm able to help them a lot better because like they'll be like having questions about something. I'm like, I think your estrogen's probably getting a little too high, right? Let's test some of these things, look for a few of these other ones that you haven't mentioned, and then you need to reach out to your provider, get some lab work, see if they're gonna give you an AI or try and use like the DIM or calcium D-glucarate. Like I literally had that conversation with a client this morning
Yeah, yeah.
before this podcast. So I'm able to help them better. And as a health and fitness service provider, I'm very, very proud of that. Regrets? No, not really. There are pressures that I'm putting on myself now that I kind of wish I didn't have because it has sucked the fun out of it a little bit for me. And knowing that I only have 1 year to do this because I'm very big on once the family time comes, I'm family Aaron. I don't want to be battling my like my boyish like dreams with like having a family. And like there's people that do that. I'm not discrediting them by any stretch of the imagination, but that's not what I want to do. So I'm trying to like speed run a bodybuilding career in like a 18-month period. And it was great until like June 10th. And then June 10th I got a hernia while I was on a leg press in Thailand. I had the operation right away in Thailand. That put me back like 3 months, and then I was finally like good to train again from September, and like September to now has been just rocky. Like I was sick twice. The one that we started talking about here right as a podcast started a lot of like gym stress stuff where like there was a period leading up to that pro camp like I didn't train for like 9 days because I was just there like assembling equipment and setting the gym up and still having to maintain my, my paying job, which is my coaching roster. So it was like there's no time to train. Like I have to just go do these things. So it's unfortunately been on the back burner, and the progress has slowed comparatively, which really like eats at me. And because I have that shorter timeline, I feel like that pressure, and I'm like, I'm wasting days. I'm wasting days. I don't have these days to waste. So it has sucked the fun out of it a little bit for me. But such is life, I suppose.
You sound like someone you talked about, wanting to see experiments through and experiencing things yourself. One of the things that strikes me listening to you is like I have to imagine you probably wouldn't coach people to do the things you've been doing. Right? Like your 2023 year, you would not inflict upon someone. You probably wouldn't have someone do an 18-month bodybuilding speed run, I would imagine.
I mean, it depends. I would never push it on anyone, you know, but like when I approached Jackson, the goal was like I laid out the confines of the goal, and he said, okay, well this is the protocol, and same thing here. Like the plan was to really do it in 12 months, and I was in a very good position until the hernia happened. Like I only needed like to put on another like 3 or 4 pounds, and the plan was like, hey, we'll start prep in like mid-July. It's the first week in June. I have like 3 pounds left to go. I'm like, hey, we're great. And then like the hernia shows up, and there goes, because I wanted to compete at the end of last year and then be done. By now I'm already done, and just back on TRT sort of thing. But everything just got pushed back with the hernia operation, and then like losing a bunch of weight, having to work back through, wait till everything's healed enough to train like I train. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily push it on someone as a coach, but if people come to me with like very ambitious goals, I will create a protocol, but I will relay that information, like because of the ambition, the size of your ambition and our timeline, it requires an increased level of effort and a deprioritization of other things in pursuit of your chosen ambition, right? I'm very, very transparent in how I communicate these things.
Yeah, I love. I mean, that's what I was thinking, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with having grand, ambitious goals and maybe adopting extreme protocols, but you have to be prepared to pay that cost. And that's
Yeah,
essentially what you've had the lifestyle and the wherewithal and the willpower to do that. Not everyone does.
exactly. And I'm fortunate I have a partner, Jenny, who's, I mean, we built our businesses and stuff together. So she understands. And I've communicated like, hey, I'm going to be selfish for these like 2 years. We're not going to be able to go do like a weekend away, or these sorts of things. But then when I'm done, it's the family is now the priority, when we have from 37 until perpetuity, of that. So
Right.
it's all I feel like in how you communicate those things. And she's very supportive, and she, likes when I have, ambition and stuff like that, because ultimately it's better for her and the family and the things that come out of it from business like down the road. So she's very, very understanding, and I'm very, very fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that you thought you might regret it if you didn't do these things, right? If you want to be firmly committed to being a family man, which sounds like you do, which is commendable, you don't want to have this door open in your mind,
Exactly.
right? It's this path you never walk through that, right? I mean, that's part of, I mean, I don't want to excuse the bad behavior of men, but that is part of the way that men fuck up their lives is that they leave these dreams unfulfilled. And then that little voice whispers and then they cheat on their wife or they blow up their life in some other way. And I think it's smart of you to address that proactively.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm trying, but that's another fortunate thing. Like I'll be starting a family when I'm like 38 years old, So I'm I'm fortunate that I've been, I guess, selfish enough to delay that so that I can like mature a little bit more and that sort of thing. Because if we were talking 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had the kind of viewpoints and, quote unquote wisdom that I have now. And I could very much see if I started a family at 28, there was a lot of doors that were not closed when I was 28 years old, So having like a 10-year delay is 10 years is a lot of time to close doors. You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, a little bit of time on my side in that regard also.
Yeah. Just briefly speak on myself. I'm married and divorced, and I was married around that 29-year-old window. We didn't stay married for very long. We didn't have kids, and regardless, again, not a commentary on her, but I would like kids now in the future. That's what I'm intending on doing. But I am grateful that I actually had this time without them, because
Yeah.
I got to accomplish things. I got to see things. I'm still doing some of those things, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's important. You have to. I think part of it's about being a role model and being able to really be there for your kids means being fully present and not imagining other worlds that you wish you were in.
Exactly. Yeah. Very, very well put.
So I may actually circle back to the kids and fertility stuff, but I do want to talk a little more about training.
Mhm.
So you talked about you said kind of in the beginning that it sounds like your training now is maybe not easier, but it's certainly less time consuming than what it was in 2023, right?
Yeah, and it had, and what it became is I had to, because I was really starting to loathe it. I had to find a middle ground where I just didn't hate being there. And some of it's like environment and that sort of thing, and I didn't love the environment of the gym that we were training at. And that's really what was the basis for, the gym that we're building, Undefeated. And my same coach, Jackson, is like the primary. It's Jackson's gym that we're building, and he's offered us some rides along the way if we wanted to be a part of it. But the environment is going to be incredible, and that's like what I really really like. It's a bodybuilding gym, whereas like all the other gyms here, they're like they try and cater to like the bodybuilders, the moms on holiday, the CrossFitters. Like you're putting all these people who have nothing really in common except for the fact that they have an interest in a gym membership together. And it's just not a great environment for anyone really, because there's been times where like we're training super hard and people complain about us, and then I'll get mad if someone's just like dicking about on their phone, not doing any set. So
Yeah.
we're creating something for the demographic that we know and care about, right? So that will help with that environment of just wanting to be there. But yeah, I had to reduce my training time just out of I was just becoming miserable, and really really not enjoying it. So I have to find a way to just enjoy it. So fortunately, I was able to know like, hey, I have this massive new factor for growth, which is the androgens. I probably don't need the volume or time duration that I once did, because there's other avenues of growth, right? There's no more just the training providing a spike in muscle protein synthesis. We have these increased rates, of synthesis, increased efficiency. Kurt Havens is one who talks really, really well about the like different pathways for muscle growth once you're on PEDs. So he was listening to him. I'm like, okay, I can probably scale things back a little bit in terms of training intensity and stuff, in volume, and still progress at a rate that I want to, while saving some of that like intensity and then drive for like maybe when prep starts or something like that, or at an increased kind of hyper focus time period.
Yeah, I really like his breakdown. He talks about, right, so from without PEDs, you've got mechanotransduction, but then with PEDs, you have the mTOR pathway, androgen receptor pathway, and IGF-1. And I do think that, and you know this obviously because you trained for forever and know how to train, you should still leverage mechanical tension,
Oh,
mechanotransduction.
100%. Yeah.
Obviously, right, like the guys who only leverage PEDs are screwing themselves over in the long run, but you can grow from drugs and not do anything else. You can't. It's shown in the literature. You see it in real life. Most of the time, those guys either don't survive or don't look that great. But nonetheless, it's totally possible, and it makes sense. I don't know if you have this too. I think there's a legitimate case for like people later in life who are get busier with business or family, and so maybe they go on TRT not necessarily because they are androgen deficient, but because they want to maintain the same level of energy and physique with less time and effort. Like I don't judge that. I think that's an acceptable decision to make if that's what you want for your life.
And that's ultimately like what you described there is like how I feel about TRT in general. There's a very common place. Like I received minimal, but like some criticism about it. And I'm like, it's a little bit different, right? Like from maybe people of other parts of the world. Like there's not many Americans and stuff over here, but especially like in America, right? Land of the free. Land of the free. So it's like you're free to choose whatever. You can have 50 guns in your house. No one bats an eye, but you're like, hey, I'm 39. I'm not having any more kids.
Right.
I have a lot more responsibilities. I can't train as much as I want, but I still want to have the physique that I have had because I enjoy it. My wife wants a hot husband. I'm going to start TRT, and then like you receive a bunch of criticism, and I'm like, for what? Fucking for what? And the other thing is people will immediately talk about the health thing, like have fun with your 30-pound heart. I'm like, bro, he's at 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. His heart's not
Right.
growing. Like you sound like a fool because you're speaking about things that you don't understand, right? And it's a lot of the like, there's just certain like natty haters. No, haters that are natty. There's also the
Yeah, yeah,
natty
yeah.
haters from
I
the
got what you
PED
meant. Yeah, yeah.
side, which I think are equally as stupid. But it's completely individual, right? You're gonna have a 26-year-old that starts a TRT and their hemoglobin goes through the roof and their lipids and stuff go through the roof. Like that's a bad genetic response, and I have seen
Hmm.
that. I've
Yeah, yeah.
seen that. You also have the people who get nothing. Nothing changes on their blood work besides the estrogen moves up proportionately and the testosterone goes up. But hematocrit, hemoglobin don't change. Their lipids don't change. Their liver and kidney function does not change. Looks pretty, benign to me and in a positive for them. So that's the other things. The individual response is massive with the introduction of exogenous testosterone. That's another one that I really wasn't ready to see, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason other than like literally genes that you don't know about, and you just have to wait and see how you or some of your clients respond.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many misconceptions. And I think fundamentally, people don't understand that these are pharmaceuticals that were developed with a specific purpose. So immediate, like it is not poison. I mean, there can be, there's a lethal dosage of everything. You can die from fucking aspirin, right? Like it really, there's a dose dependent relationship. There's individual response. It isn't necessarily going to kill you. It could, but like that's not necessarily the game you're playing. And then I also think, again, to just your points about moralizing. I mean, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I guess I just grew up in a time where it was really unfortunate, where heroin got really big. Right, like you mentioned dare. Like I knew people who sat with me in dare class when they were 9 and who OD'd from heroin. So I get this association that PEDs have with recreational drugs. Injection is injection, and people have that visceral response to it, but it's still, at the end of the day, you are moralizing, you're projecting your own beliefs and your own judgment onto other people. And I think that the best, again, we are Americans. You fled to Bali, so you have a better life than I do, but you're still an American. And like, it's more about, I have individual sovereignty. Am I infringing upon your rights? Am I hurting you with my behavior? And probably, and I don't, I'm like, maybe I'm ranting a little bit now, but I know that Rick Collins is this very famous PED lawyer, and he's done this. Like, there's a study that shows that the majority of people, of men who take testosterone, are actually higher earners, work harder, more educated. Like that's the demographic, right? It does. Again, there's always the 16-year-old Sarm Goblin, or there's Dallas McCarver who will ruin their life, right? Like, there
Yep.
are exceptions, of course, and like as coaches, we should try to protect people from that. But to stigmatize the entire population just because of those exceptions, I just think is unfair.
I mean, it's like in any context to stigmatize an entire race from So I mean, you can extrapolate that exact statement to anything, and everyone be like, oh yeah, every Asian person is not bad, every whatever person is not bad, but but then that gets extrapolated onto like the testosterone. Same thing. Like you can run 100 milligrams per week. You can also run literally like 50 times that. Like those are your extremes. It's people think of it like a light switch, but it's more of like a dial, right? You can run a little bit and you'll get likely some improvement in various aspects of your life with potentially zero change to any other, health metric. And that would be great, right? You can also have the opposite. You can have a bad response, and that would probably be encouraged to then not use it from a pure health standpoint. But again,
Have you experienced? I mean, you talked about estrogen stuff, but have you
mhm.
experienced any kind of skewed blood markers? Probably lipids, but aside from that.
My lipids got better. So I have someone, I'm
Yeah.
like genetically not great lipids, not like bad, but like my LDL will float in like a 105 to like 120, like not horrible, but I've never been, quote unquote overweight. I just run high LDL, a little bit of like a high ApoB, and mine actually improved, I think, due to the favorable partitioning of the testosterone that happens there. And because I'm now replacing my endogenous testosterone with exogenous testosterone, I don't need to take my dietary fats as high from a pregnenolone standpoint. So I run really low fats. I run saturated fats pretty much as low as I possibly can. I'm only having red meat, like, I don't know, maybe twice per month. Not that I think it's bad or anything like that, but
No,
for
but the
my own
saturated fat for sure.
response, yep, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
keep it really low. No, mine improved my fasting glucose. I'm another one, like, genetically I run high fasting glucose, high LDL, moderate, high, but my fasting insulin is always like bare bottom. Like my body just for some reason does not use more insulin to pull the fasting blood glucose down, but those improved. The only negative that I have seen is my EGFR has gone down, and that's because of a specific compound that I'm using for my off season. But I'm fortunate from a blood work perspective. Like my lipids haven't changed. Right, I'm on a moderate dose now. My hemoglobin has not budged at all. My hematocrit has not budged at all. My red blood cells haven't budged at all. Yeah, it's really wild. I kept like waiting for those and they just don't. My blood pressure, like I got it yesterday. I have a cuff that I typically do every morning, but like I've been sick. So like I had an IV drip person come. My blood pressure was 106 over 59, right? And
Oh, wow.
that's
Yeah.
and that's on a compound that causes high blood pressure, but it's a genetic response. In that I cannot stress that enough. And you just do not know until you explore if that is going to be what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. So real quick, are you your EGFR? Are you using cystatin C to calculate or
Yeah,
creatinine and
cystatin
BUN?
C just over like
Just over,
yeah, of like the upper bound. It's like a I forget. It's from like a 0.6 to like a 1.1 or something
slightly
like
above
that.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just like I was just above one. Um,
Yeah.
so
And I won't speak to you, but I do know, and I've seen this with people, is that actually HGH can elevate cystatin C, interestingly enough, and that's
okay.
supported in literature. Yeah,
Mhm.
but doesn't. But again, I mean, kidney health. I'm not a nephrologist, right? But like kidney health is complicated. Just because those markers are elevated does not necessarily mean that your kidneys aren't filtering properly. My EGFR from creatinine and BUN has always been like 60, 65, and
Okay.
it's been like that for 10 years. And
Mm,
I've had ultrasounds. It seems to be, I actually think it would go down if I like stopped working out for 2 weeks, because the best I've ever had it was 75 after a break for like 10 days. So I think it's just the way my body deals with those waste products. But like, again, this is the reason why you check blood markers and you monitor these things over time, because then you get to see how you're responding.
yeah. And for anyone kind of listening, like I'll be transparent. Like I was afraid, when I went from like the test, just the TRT at 150 up to like PED levels. Like I was legitimately afraid, right? And I was doing a recap at the end of the year because I was comparing some blood marker numbers. I got labs 7 times last year. seven
That's a lot,
blood,
man.
7 panels,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
because like if something like felt off, I was like, I was
Right.
transparent. I was scared, right? So I was just constantly getting labs. Or if we would like travel somewhere, like when I went to Thailand, it's cheaper to get labs. I got labs. I went to Malaysia for a weekend to watch friends compete. I got labs. I didn't get labs
It's
when I
it's
was in the
like a
States, but
recreational activity for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And it was like I wanted to see. I'm like, okay, but like nothing really changed. I will say there the period where I was off one of the compounds when I was recovering from my hernia, because I basically just dropped down to my TRT again. My EGFR went right back up to where it was before, so that was nice. And then when I went back on, I watched it drop again, and I was like, okay, cool. That made me feel a little bit better that it's just a response to that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think your fear is totally justified. right? Like
I'm
you are
glad I was scared.
conducting
Yeah.
scientific scientific experiments on yourself.
Hmm.
And I think it does help understanding the causal relationship, right? Seeing that this thing does this, that can help to alleviate a lot of the anxiety.
Yeah. And I just think, if you're not scared, then you're probably going to want like, hey, my lifts didn't go up these 3 weeks. Like I'm going to put more drugs in or something like that. And I've done zero of that. And I think because of that fear. So but again, I think that comes to like an age thing, like I don't want to die at 59 when I have like a 15-year-old or something like that through, selfish choices I made in my late 30s to pursue, a late, bodybuilding, not really career, but time sort of thing.
Adventure.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm thinking for the future and just being safeguarding in that for, my family and those sorts of things.
And I do think you mentioned you interact with Jackson. Jackson competes as a pro, right? Sounds like,
Yep.
or
Yeah.
is
He,
vying for
he
pro
got his
card.
pro card, in October of this past year.
Yeah, and I will say I don't know him personally at all, but you do meet and maybe you coach guys like this. Their risk tolerance can be very different.
Hmm.
There are people who who make, I would say, rational, calculated decisions to slam the pedal down.
Hmm.
And I think that, like, again, that has never been. I think I am too cautious and too afraid to want to do a thing like that. But I think that you can responsibly make that decision as long as you know what may happen.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely different people with different risk tolerances, different levels of ambition, that sort of thing. But I'm fortunate that like Jackson's my coach, business partner, but also like friend, and him and I both know that like my risk tolerance is not as high as others. So
And just one last point, you were talking about lipids. Yeah, I have a client who was obese and pre-diabetic, and since going on TRT, his lipids have consistently improved. And it's the same reason you alluded to. It's that improved nutrient partitioning, insulin sensitivity. Really, I think, and there's also in the literature there are men who are pre-hypogonadal or hypogonadal, and then with the introduction of TRT, their lipids improve. Like
yeah.
your body, for some people, your body just, well, I would say with everyone, your body functions with a baseline better with a baseline level of testosterone.
Yeah. It's like the way that I've described it to clients, and I try and like dumb it down, is like your muscles kind of get greedy with resources. So whereas like they wouldn't soak up, some of those resources, they would only take like, what they needed. But now, because there's like a higher signal to grow and those sorts of things, like they'll grab more of what comes by. Like they're getting greedy, and therefore it cannot go to other things. Right. So it's a very like kind of dumbed down way, but, it very much does like, it's a decent explanation for how, unscientific it is.
No, I like that. I mean, you can't. I like to nerd out. I think you like to nerd out a little bit, but like you have to speak to people in the language they understand. That's part of being a human and definitely part of being a coach.
Yeah.
So maybe just sort of we get nearer to the end. We talked a little bit about your plans for fatherhood. Are
Mhm.
you how like again? You've still got time, but like, are you doing proactive things for your fertility now?
Not now. What I did back in November 2021. So before, like the last time I was still in the States, I got some sperm frozen just as like a very, cover my ass, you know, 911 scenario sort of thing. So that's all been done. All really, really good. And I have a good baseline and know like what things were like before. And I've done a lot of I've read a lot of the research, the literature on it. I have a plan for when that does start. So FSH, HCG, all that sort of thing. And there's other like little ancillaries that, can, potentially help, like the injectable L-carnitine and in those sorts of things. Temperature. So I'll probably start doing some of the ice baths. Like,
You're gonna ice your balls. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I'll probably just do the ice bath, but I
yeah.
mean, I don't know if I find an easy way to do it. I can sit here and work and ice my balls, sure. But as funny as it is, I look forward to that phase because again, it's a new goal, right? And the way that I've described it to my fiance is like in creating like a child, right? I want to give that child the best of what I have. So I want to go. I'm gonna treat it like this. I'm getting in this insane health. I'm gonna be as insanely healthy as possible. So there's gonna be only good high quality foods. Like I'm going to add an extra like vegetables and things like that. The cardio is going to go in daily, and I'm going to do all these things to produce the highest quality sperm that I can, so that I can give like the best of my DNA to my future child. And I look very much forward to that, because I feel like it's like the bodybuilding things, like it's going to be fun, hopefully it's not
Right.
miserable, but it's like a one and done sort of thing. This other goal is like something that will hopefully be turn into something, great, or that I'm proud of, or whatever. And I just, I want to give my future, seed or whatever, like the best of what I can of me. So I'm going to take that time period insanely seriously. And we've been consuming a little bit more like fertility research and those sorts of things. And there's a growing kind of maybe paradigm's not the proper terminology, but that the first, like the beginnings of the pregnancy and the symptoms and those sorts of things and the quality of it has a lot to do with the father and the quality of the sperm, right?
Mm,
Because our like World Health Organization of like, I think it's like 5 million, sperm per volume, whatever. That's the like minimum acceptable amount.
right.
And it's like,
Right.
congratulations, it may work. Like you've crawled over the finish line just in time, sort of thing. That's not what I'm shooting for, right? Like I want to
Right.
be as the best that I possibly can.
Yeah.
So that is like I'm very, very excited to this like 3 month super health focused period around us, like, trying to, or me trying to produce the best sperm that I can.
That's no, that's really inspiring, man. I really like that. I will say it is a weird thought in the sense that both it's weird. I mean, it's just weird objectively, right?
Yeah.
But it's also weird because like I'm certain your parents, like my dad, didn't actively think about the quality of his sperm.
No,
Right? And like
not
we
even
figured out
close.
okay. Right, but it is weird to think that like no, we're at this stage in our lives in this world, like we're trying to micro engineer so much that we could do that. But again, like it's we have why not? Right, like, and also, I think in some ways you could even argue it's your responsibility, right? Like, you know that this is a thing you can do. Why wouldn't you give your child the best chance possible?
Yeah, and I think too, like age comes into it. Like my dad was 23, and I'm gonna be 15 years older than that. So, and we know like as age increases, you get like higher rates of DNA fragmentation. Like time is working against us, So that's another aspect. Whereas like if you're having a child at 22, 23, like you probably can just be drinking and partying and that sort of thing, but like you're still
Sure.
time has
Yeah.
not worked against you yet. So that's I think another aspect. But like I said, I'm just trying to control things that I can control. Maybe it is a big nothing burger, right? But at least I know that I'm controlling everything that I possibly can.
When I don't know, I mean, I imagine you would agree with this. Like, that's probably the way to live your life. You focus on the things you can control. There's only so much we can impact. Focus on that which is in your path and ignore everything else.
Yeah, pretty much. Try to ignore everything else. Yeah.
Try to. I mean, right? It's a loud fucking world out there,
Yeah,
but you do what you can.
exactly.
Cool, man. So this is awesome. I guess we're basically at time. I know you've got your. We talked a little bit about your gym. Is there going to be like an official public opening? How is that rollout going to
Yeah,
go?
yeah, yeah. So don't get me wrong. Everyone, like, anytime I post myself training, people are like, "Is it open yet? Is it open?" I'm like, "I promise, we are not gatekeeping it in to not make money for no reason." Like,
Right.
believe me, everyone wants this
Dude,
open as much as you.
did you ever used to watch South Park?
Yeah,
Do you remember the episode where Carmen buys the amusement park and won't let anybody in?
yeah,
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 yeah. I
yeah.
promise it's not like that. Yeah, it's
Not
just
like that.
we're just gonna. It's not gonna be open until it's ready and finished, and everyone is a little bit of like kind of like perfectionists and that sort of thing, where we just have to wait, And unfortunately, we just when you're on a timeline of someone else, like the builder and that sort of thing, and like we're on an island, so a lot of things have to get shipped in, and it just takes time. So yeah, there's the gym page. The gym is called Undefeated Gym. So there's an Instagram page that updates will be there and that sort of thing. So yeah, you can all follow along there.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll share your contact info. That's where you're most active on Instagram and the podcast.
Instagram and the podcast. Yeah, that's pretty much. I don't do anything on like Facebook. I have a YouTube that I don't really use because I'm just don't have the bandwidth to really create the content like I want to. But yeah, if you want to reach out to me, Instagram will be easiest. And then the podcast is on YouTube, and you can catch a lot of myself and my co-host Brian, who's a wealth of training, knowledge, and information. I'm eternally grateful for him for on there.
Cool. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having the time. I enjoyed this conversation.